Hi. I am super happy to host today's conversation with my friend and collaborator, Dr. Unhae Park Langis. Unhae is a fellow of the New Swan Shakespeare Center, and she is the author of this fabulous book on Shakespeare and virtue. Unhae, you have also been doing some really interesting work on the resonance of Buddhist teachings about happiness and the good life in the plays of Shakespeare, especially in Hamlet and King Lear. And so I was hoping you could tell us how you got interested in this topic.
Well, Julia, before teaching college, I taught high school English for about 10 years. What you see in public schools is a real lack in the exploration of value systems and religions. As a teacher in the mid-90s, I felt a yearning in my soul, and I could hear it in my students as well. What is life about? How do we fit into the scheme of things? What makes a good life? I discovered Greek philosophy in a teacher workshop, and it gave me the philosophical grounding to embrace the eudaimonic way of life, both inside and outside the classroom. Eudaimonia is roughly translated as happiness or flourishing in Greek virtue ethics. It's not only an end result, but more importantly, a continuous developmental activity throughout one's life. As for the Eastern expressions of eudaimonia, I came across those much later after I had retired from teaching. I stumbled upon Buddhism when I developed sciatica and ultimately had to become my own doctor and do my own mind-body work with the help of the internet. This was about the time that I was exploring Stoicism in my research, and I began to find remarkable similarities between the two philosophies. This rapprochement of the East and West, for me, is a great satisfaction because, hey, that's been the story of my life since I came here at age 6. You know, one of the great costs of immigration is cultural loss. I am way more educated in Western culture than Eastern culture. What a curiosity I must present, an Asian woman versed in Shakespeare and ancient dead white men.
That's so fun. Bringing Buddhism and Shakespeare together is not, though, as crazy as it sounds, right? Because many historians and philosophers of religion have pointed to commonalities between ancient Greek and Roman philosophy and Eastern philosophy. So can you tell us a little bit about this shared heritage? How it come about and what teachings are shared in the ancient West and the ancient East?
Sure. Let me answer this in 2 parts. First, Greco-Buddhism. When I first stumbled upon this scholarly field, I was both surprised and not surprised. When Alexander the Great defeated the Great Persian Empire in the 4th century BCE and defeated the Indian Mauryans briefly, Greeks began to settle in northern India, notably in Bactria. And there was a gradual intermixing of Hellenistic culture and Buddhism across the next 9 centuries. So you see, for example, stunning statues of Buddha, where you can clearly see the influence of Greek art. And apparently, there were Greek Buddhists active in the spread of Buddhism throughout the Indian subcontinent. With regard to Buddhism and Shakespeare, the focal point is the Greek philosopher Pyrrho, who, as a member of Alexander's entourage in India, became exposed to Buddhist ideas in his encounter with Indian yogis, the so-called naked philosophers, which is referred to in King Lear in Edgar as a beggar. Whether the skeptical school of thought that Pyrrho founded arises out of the skeptical tradition in Greek or Buddhist philosophies or both remains disputed. In any case, striking parallels can be found between the famous Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna and Pyrrho's main spokesman Sextus Empiricus regarding skepsis, which is Greek for open-ended inquiry. The well-quoted line in Hamlet, "There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so," is usually understood as an expression of relativity, but a more profound way of looking at it is through skepticism, which in both traditions implies a non-substantiality or emptiness of persons and things. To clarify, Pyrrho also said, "Nothing really exists, but human life is governed by convention." In other words, everything is socially constructed, and even the self is a false belief with no corresponding reality. Buddhism also posits that all phenomena are void of inherent existence And we too, as phenomena, lack substance as selves. We may perceive ourselves as tangible entities, but when you get down to the atomic or subatomic level, the world is seamlessly interconnected and totally empty of self. When you internalize such wisdom through habitual suspension of judgment without reacting to stimuli, you'll arrive at nirvana or ataraxia, its Pyrrhonian or Stoic counterpart.
Wow. So let's dive into King Lear. Your reading of the play begins with a consideration of nothing, one of the deepest and most mysterious words of the play. It means one thing to Cordelia, it means something very different to Lear. And you talk about their exchange in the beginning of the play as a kind of Buddhist koan. Can you tell us about this?
Sure. A Buddhist koan is a Zen story or situation involving a dialogue or event between master and student. Now, when Cordelia replies nothing to Lear's expectation of praise, she signals surrender to this flattery fest. I suppose she could have let him down more gently than this abrupt freefall, but that's how a Zen koan works. By skillfully wielding language, the koan aims to shock in order to create an opening wedge for an epiphany. Sometimes it's like a sudden dousing of water. It wakes you up, or it pisses you off, depending on your state of mind at the time. Well, it doesn't work with Lear, who is too immersed in ego to realize that he's driven her to this crash landing in a high-stakes competition. His ego logic is unable to process Buddhist non-dualist logic, by which nothing is everything, and everything nothing. If you take away the flattery of the elder sisters, Lear is left with nothing, as we see later. Whereas Cordelia's plain-speaking nothing expands to the plenitude of her filial bond. Her nothing is a lesson in thusness, everything that her filial piety should be, and everything that we cannot discern when we don't attend to the present with full mind and heart.
Beautiful. So you argue that sympathy and loving kindness are values or virtues that are shared by Buddhist, Stoic, Judeo-Christian, and also Native American wisdom traditions. So what is loving kindness and how does it manifest in King Lear?
Okay, so let me first clarify that the Buddhist conception of emptiness is not nihilism, but rather interconnectedness or interbeing. Likewise, no self doesn't mean you have no self. It means living free from self-attached craving and instead drawing purpose and energy from the organic web of connectedness rather than a mental construct of separate selves with no corresponding reality. What is spectacular is that practically all the wisdom traditions around the world articulate some variation of this oneness, this belief in the spiritual interconnectedness and inherent unity of all phenomena, and that happiness is linked to living according to this wisdom. As Shakespeare puts it, one touch of nature makes the whole world kin. So now, emotionally speaking, this kinship in Buddhism centers on loving kindness. Like its Greco-Christian version, agape, or selfless love, this loving kindness means treating the other person gently, like a friend. In meditation, it is a wish for all beings to be free from suffering. In conduct, it means directing one's attention to the happiness or suffering of others. Loving kindness counteracts selfishness, anger, and fear, and awakens us to a sense of unity beyond suffering, beyond fragmentation and alienation. Now, returning to the play, in the first scene, Cordelia's nothing response apparently pushes Lear's ego button and he goes nuclear. Well, it takes many more dousings of water for Cordelia's schooling to sink in. As bad as suffering is, Shakespeare shows its wholesome side, which opens up space for mindful compassion when Lear shows heartfelt concern for his fool and Edgar disguised as a beggar. Lear launches into one of the most famous meditations in Western literature on kindness and economic justice, if you will, with concern for the houseless heads, the homeless people braving the pitiless storm. And he says, take physic, pomp, expose thyself to fear what wretches feel, that thou mayst shake the superflux to them, and show the heavens more just. Here, take physic is usually understood as cure yourself. Physic meaning both physician as well as the means of cure. But it's also vital to remember that physic derives from physis, the ancient Greek word for, you got it, nature, referring both to the little world of man and the natural world itself within an interdependent ecosystem. Now you know why one touch of nature makes the whole world kin became such a popular slogan for ecologists. So, take physic in an ancient wisdom sense means to heed nature mindfully, to heal thyself by knowing and acting in kinship with other beings and justly interacting with the natural world. Boy, doesn't that sound like wisdom? We could certainly take physic in these times of pandemic, climate change, and persistent economic and social inequalities.
Absolutely, thank you. So I totally agree with you that Lear and Gloucester are both embarked on journeys of enlightenment. I can't not read their journeys as yielding meaning for them. But the stumbling block for me in the play is always the death of Cordelia. I can't read that final scene and make sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
But you've actually used Buddhism to rethink some of the significance of that. So can you tell us what Cordelia's death means to you in a Buddhist frame?
Yeah, so Shakespeare as author could easily have let Cordelia live and let us feel good that the good guy wins and the bad guy dies. Instead, he lets her die senselessly, thereby underscoring permanent mysteries of human life that we encounter daily. Just turn on the news. I think ultimately, having the audience grapple with Cordelia's senseless death opens up possibilities of growth for us that would not happen otherwise. So let me give you a Buddhist response to Cordelia's death. And it involves a shifting of perspective in two important ways. First, we can accept her death because Cordelia herself is the type of selfless martyr who would ask, why not me? Instead of, why me? She acts with full conviction and no regret. Secondly, as radical as it sounds, Buddhist interbeing reveals a compassionate stance toward our perceived enemies and persecutors. Take a look at the Tibetan Buddhist monks who underwent ordeals of torture. Surprisingly, these monks were not experiencing feelings of rage, fear, dehumanization, and isolation commonly associated with PTSD. Rather, they had the breadth of vision to shun dualistic thinking like good versus bad, and to see that antagonists in any conflict are two sides of the same problem. As emotional beings, we're all entangled in the same web of violence, though we may play different parts in the unjust institutions, social systems, and ideas that perpetuate suffering. So even as we enjoy his art, Shakespeare's insistence that we face hard truths of reality encourages in us a stance of humility and human kindness enhanced through a Buddhist lens. We'll need to bank on these qualities with the various challenges ahead, pandemic, climate change, and persisting inequalities. Instead of activist burnout, mindfulness allows the mental reserves to respond with alacrity and firmness in those situations of injustice demanding action, like Black Lives Matter's insistence upon a full-out transformation of policing. As Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. clearly show us, proper actions of human kindness and justice flow more effectively from lives grounded in equanimity, from people who are at peace with themselves and with the universe that may appear hostile at times.
Wow, that's really beautiful. Thank you so much, Unhae. Let's talk again soon. Thank
you. Of course. Thank you, sure.